Good morning. I'm Jonathan Capehart, opinion writer for the Washington Post. Welcome to First Look, Washington Post Live's one-stop shop for news and analysis. And joining us this morning, I should say returning to us this morning, is Annie Linskey, White House reporter for the Washington Post. Welcome back, Annie.
Hi there, good to be here.
So, what are we going to talk about? Last night, President Biden did a primetime address to the nation there at the East Room of the White House. What were some of your takeaways?
Well, I mean, the biggest takeaway for everybody, I think, was his sort of redefinition of July 4th as Independence Day, not just as the country's birthday, but also for some measure of independence from the virus. So, he's setting a deadline for himself. He loves to do this. He does. He's a deadline-driven president, and he's saying that by July 4th there should be a more normal, at least, type of celebrations around the country. The big news, the big headline out of the speech was that he's saying that all Americans who are adults will be eligible to get the vaccine by May 1st. And that's a really big deal. It's just opening up the eligibility floodgates so that there's going to be a date at which you can really sign up. Still, I mean, that still means you're still going to be waiting for a while before you can necessarily actually get it. But he is trying to show that there's some hope coming, even while he's trying to also tell people to keep wearing masks and to continue to be vigilant. So that is a little bit of a balancing act.
Right. Some light at the end of the tunnel. You mentioned July 4th. I'm just wondering, given what we know about the rate of vaccinations, is it realistic, or is it the situation that's been reported in our paper and other papers that the president has been very good about setting goals and deadlines that are actually way more conservative than the information he has telling him what can actually be done?
Absolutely. I mean, the one way of looking at it is he's trying to sort of under promise and over deliver. You could also
That's
say
what I
that
was looking for.
he could also say that he's setting goals that are already being achieved. So there are definitely different ways of seeing that. But I think he's looking at the fact that Americans really just want some facts and something that they can look to as like, all right, this is where the end could be. Now, of course, the other major thing that he talked about in the speech, and the other major thing yesterday, was that his first legislative achievement was signed yesterday, kind of a massive piece of legislation. And that's something that he's also the very early stages of beginning to now go out and explain to the American people. I mean, it is possible that this is all that he will be able to pass in the first 2 years of his presidency. I mean, there is a scenario where this is it. And so they are also starting a very that are a little behind the eight ball on this, but starting the process of trying to figure out how to best sell it to the American people.
Before we get to the big selling campaign that's about to get underway next week, Republicans. There's a recent CBS News poll that showed that more than 1/3 of Republicans have said that they will not get the vaccine. So has there been any push by the White House to bridge this divide? What are they going to do to bridge that divide?
Well, that's a great point. I mean, I think a lot of the early reporting about vaccine hesitancy and the populations that would be most skeptical of the vaccine were focused on minority communities, African American communities. But as you point out, what we're finding is that it's actually, rural and poor white communities, Republicans, that are in effect expressing the most hesitancy towards taking this vaccine and embracing it. And so, what the White House is trying to do, Biden is obviously not the best messenger for many of these people who see him and his presidency as illegitimate. And you saw all of the former presidents doing an ad this week that would tell people to take the vaccine, including former President Bush. But I think you're also going to see this being a place where Trump could play some kind of role. He didn't participate in the effort with the former presidents, but he has said that his people should take their shot, as he puts it. And I think that's going to be, I mean, believe it or not, he's going to be one of the better messenger for that population. And Trump has an incentive here. I mean, he does want to take credit. I mean, the vaccine is one of the few things that went well in his presidency, in large part because he himself was not that involved with it, and therefore it was not kind of the stunning mess that many other of his initiatives turned out to be. But he does want to take credit now, and I believe that you can see that there are some instances of him wanting to get that message out there, so his people will take.
Annie, what's really strange is he and Melania Trump got the vaccine just before they left the White House. And they didn't tell the American people. They didn't sit down and do an interview or do a video. It was leaked. It came out in press reports. But anyway, we'll leave that aside. There's one more thing that I want to ask you in the little time that we have left. President Biden signed the American Rescue Act yesterday, a day earlier than we expected. And now we know that he and members of the administration are going to fan out across the country next week to sell the plan. What's the political calculation here, especially since the initial map that I've seen, Nevada, Colorado, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and there's a state I'm missing, but these are all states that are either blue or purple, but no quote unquote red states.
Yeah, I'm reporting this week from inside the White House that there was a lot. There were a lot of discussions. They were really scrambling to figure out exactly how they were going to sell the plan. There were people in the White House pushing and hoping, and making the case that Biden should go to at least one red state in his early sales pitch. But the sort of schedule for the president was not settled until really 2 days ago at this point. And the first stop they announced was Delaware County, Pennsylvania, which is just a few miles from his house in Wilmington. So, I mean, the more generous way of looking at this is that the White House had been focused on, getting this thing passed and not really on what the next phase in terms of really selling it to the American people will be. But, I mean, Biden himself has talked about the importance of making sure that Americans understand, for his own political, future, making sure that Americans understand that his administration is responsible for the $1,400 checks, for the child subsidies that the government is going to be sending out for the first time. And it is kind of stunning that they didn't have a clearer picture of what they were going to do once this thing passed. They have time. They have the benefit that the bill is quite popular as it is. But as we know, you really can't rest on those laurels. And you're already seeing Republicans who voted against the bill taking credit for portions of it, which is also kind of interesting. So, the White House clearly is behind the 8 ball here, but they do have time.
I'm trying to remember what how Speaker Pelosi described it. It was something, vote no, but take the dough. She was talking about Senator Wicker of Mississippi, who voted against the bill, but then put out press releases and praised a certain piece of the bill that would help his constituents in Mississippi. Annie Linskey, thank you very much for coming back to First Look. Have a good weekend.
Yeah, thank you. You too.
And now we are going to head to the opinion side of the Washington Post, where we will find my colleagues, Washington Post columnists Catherine Rampell and Hugh Hewitt. Hugh, Catherine, welcome back to First Look. Let's start by just getting your brief impressions of the president's speech last night. Hugh, you go first.
Workmanlike. He did what I expected him to do. It was short. The continuing concern about his record-setting indifference to questions from the press. He could have taken an opportunity to do that last night, but it was a workmanlike celebration. I thought that Speaker Pelosi and Leader Schumer did a better job celebrating. But, he got a big deal passed. He did his victory lap, and now they're more ahead. So workmanlike, not inspiring, but necessary.
Seriously, Catherine, not inspiring?
It's interesting. I think of Obama's superpower as his soaring rhetoric, Trump's political superpower as his spectacle, and Biden's is his empathy. And I think that was really on display last night. I thought he did a good job. There wasn't a lot of, fancy soaring rhetoric like we would have expected from the president for whom he served as VP. But he did a good job of, addressing the pain and feeling of loss that Americans are feeling and giving a sense of hope, connecting with his audience and encouraging his audience to connect with one another. There was a lot of we in this speech last night, a lot of talk about how this was a shared project and he needed Americans to do their part and pitch in, and then we will be able to come together, hopefully, on Independence Day to celebrate in small groups, of course, our independence from this virus. So, yeah, I thought it was a good speech. I thought it captured the mood of the nation. It was soothing. I don't know that there were particular lines that will stand the test of history per se. That there was the talk about barbecues, which sounded a little bit like, a chicken in every pot kind of rhetoric, but didn't have quite the same, I don't know, turns of phrase, but I thought that the tone was spot on.
I think the most memorable moment from President Biden's speech last night was when he sort of broke decorum and sort of speech protocol by leaning on the podium and leaning into the camera and saying, "I need you." This is one, to my mind, I'm going to interject myself in here and just say that, sure, it was workmanlike and brief, and sure, it didn't have the soaring rhetoric, but I do agree with you, Catherine, that it overflowed with empathy. And I don't think he can give too many speeches where he's overflowing with empathy, especially after the last 4 years where we had a president who had none and also used every opportunity to talk to the American people, to talk about himself. But let's talk about a few things in the American Rescue Plan, nitty-gritty things. Catherine, yesterday, as you know, in the plan, there is, you wrote about the historic win for children, how this plan, the American Rescue Plan, would cut child poverty in half. So what could this mean for the economy in the long term? And in your answer, talk about the fact that a lot of these things are not permanent and are slated to disappear, next year?
Right. So this is a huge victory for America's children, delivered somewhat poetically by America's oldest ever president. But there's a lot in here that I think has not attracted the same amount of attention as other parts of the bill or other parts that had been in the bill, like the minimum wage getting dropped or the stimulus checks were obviously, they stayed in, but they were a focus of the conversation. I think the single most important centerpiece of this legislation is the creation of child allowances. It's basically an expansion of the existing child tax credit that will be delivered periodically in advance and will become newly available to the very poorest children in America who previously were not eligible for this particular benefit from the federal government. That will have a major impact on child poverty by simply giving cash to struggling parents. But there's a lot of other stuff in there as well that is child-centric. There's $39 billion worth of funding for childcare facilities. There's funding for schools. There's funding for Head Start. There are other expansions of what kinds of children are eligible, for example, for the stimulus checks, including immigrant children, or excuse me, U.S. citizen children whose parents are both undocumented immigrants. So there's a lot in here that is about helping the youngest among us and investing in their long-term development, making sure that they get sufficient nutrition and all of that, things that we know have big payoffs in the long run. But as you point out, It's temporary. And in particular, the most exciting piece of this, the child allowances, those are only for a year. Democrats have made pretty clear that they want this to be a permanent feature of the tax code. And there is some limited Republican support for the idea. Mitt Romney came out with his own sort of rival version of this policy. But if they are going to do it permanently, it will probably need to be paid for, which this was not. And that will be a fight in and of itself about how do you fund something like this.
So Hugh, I'm sure you have a lot to say about this. And correct me if I'm wrong, you sent out a tweet maybe an hour or so ago. If I was reading it right, you like the child tax credits. And what I couldn't tell was whether you think they should be permanent. The one thing I did read is that you thought that folks should use those tax credits and plug them into, paying for private school or parochial school tuition. Give me your thoughts on the benefits to children and whether conservatives like that part of the plan and whether they would go for those temporary, those temporary child tax credits and other things for them to be permanent.
I'll begin by saying Ronald Reagan used to say about the child confronting a stable full of manure, there's got to be a pony in there somewhere. Well, the pony in this stable is the child benefit. And it's an extraordinary benefit. I read Catherine's column. I agree with it. I read Michael Gerson's column. I agree with it. I read David Brooks's column. I agree with it. And I've just spent 3 hours on the radio telling 400 affiliates, this is the greatest thing to happen to private education in the history of private education. The Democrats passed a voucher program. Now, they don't know that they did that, but they did that. And every parent is going to get, for every child, $1,400. And if they're under 6, they're going to get $300 a month. And if they're between 6 and 17, they're going to get $250 a month. So if I was a private school administrator, a Catholic school, Jewish school, Christian school, private school that's non-sectarian, I would be out proselytizing today that don't worry about those public schools that are still closed. Don't worry about those teachers' unions that are preventing your child from getting an education. Come enroll your child at our school beginning in the fall and commit to us those tax payments, which I believe are going to be trying to come from the IRS on a monthly basis, and we'll give you a desk for whatever you can afford. I think it is the biggest opportunity to shake up public and private education in the United States that's ever come along. I'm a huge fan of it, and I want them to make it permanent. Absolutely. It is a voucher program. They just didn't know that they passed it.
Catherine?
It's cash.
Go ahead.
It's cash. The parents can use it as they see fit. If they want to use it for investing in their kids' education, they can. If they want to use it to upgrade to more stable housing, they can. If they want to use it, to make it easier to put food on the table, they can. And it really empowers the parents to figure out where they need to plug the holes in their budget to make sure that their kids are having a healthy environment. If they want to use it for education, that's their right. And it's an interesting way of pitching it to conservatives, and maybe there's political power in that. But I would say it's not exclusively about using it for tuition.
Right. I mean, I think you're both right, but I think the genius of what Hugh is saying, it's the power of suggestion. Hugh, you are telling people, hey, you're about to get this money, so let me tell you how to spend it. Which, I
got to say as well, when you combine $300 a month for a child under 6, if you invest in a 529 plan, which most states have, and you rigorously commit to it. Now, Catherine's right. There are some families on the edge that have to get food, that they are housing insecure. They may have lost their housing. That is, there's less than 10% unemployment in the United States, but 90% of people have a job, and some of them are food insecure, and they'll have to take some of it. But if you take this money and you put it into a 529 where it can grow tax-free, you're going to pay for college for these children. If you invest wisely in private accounts and you just dedicate yourself to it. So I am not surprised that Governor Romney was out there with a similar plan. I expect Republicans to step back and say, okay, look, I don't like bailing out San Francisco. The idea that we're going to give billions of dollars to New York State, which is so poorly run, or California, which is a disaster, so that Gavin Newsom's going to be recalled, that's horrible. But let's isolate the good stuff. The good stuff is the COVID relief, and the good stuff is, as Catherine said, it is the most significant granting of money to children in the history of the world. And it's up to the parents to steward that money well. I think they can best steward it by either putting them into a fine parochial school right now or by saving it at 529. That's my personal view, and I'm going to argue for it every day.
I will point out that actually a lot of other countries already have a child allowance, a lot of other developed countries, and it's had a good record. Canada, Australia, Germany, where it's called Kindergeld. So this is not a, this would be a well-trod path. And, there's plenty of evidence that this will enrich the lives of children.
So Hugh, you talked about, this is a good thing, but you've written about a bad thing that you think is going to come as a result of the American Rescue Plan, and that is inflation. Meanwhile, you've got the Fed chair saying, don't worry about it. We don't have to worry about inflation. But on the other hand, you've got JP Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon saying, we're keeping our eye on this threat. Lay out your thinking about why you are not just worried, you think it's going to happen, that inflation is just going to explode as a result of the American Rescue Plan.
Well, I look at you two youngsters and I think neither of you bought a house in 1983. And I did. It was the first house that we bought, and the interest rate was 12.5% for a little Fairlington town house over across the river. And 12.5% was a heck of an interest rate to pay. We are now getting on a 30-year fixed loan around 3%, a little bit below 2 or up to 2.5 or 3. You can't print $2 trillion and not have an impact on the amount of money chasing the same amount of housing stock, the same amount of cars, the same amount of anything. And so if anything with classical economics, Keynesian, whatever, Straussian, whatever you want, Hayek, they all say the same thing. If you print a lot of money, you get inflation. This is the most money we've ever printed. Joe Biden did in 8 weeks more than President Obama did in 8 years. He has spent $2 trillion. It's an astonishing amount of money. I can't even get my arms around it. And that kind of an infusion of cash immediately is going to accelerate growth this year. I saw the Post yesterday quoted 5.89%. Some in the Wall Street Journal say as high as 8% GDP. But after that comes the end of the 70s and the early 80s. And eventually we're going to have a Reagan and a Volcker. We're going to put the country through a ringing recession in order to kill off inflation, because inflation destroys wealth quicker than anything for people who do not have property or stock.
Catherine, what do you think?
So he was right. It's been a very long time since we have suffered high inflation. In fact, one of the primary economic problems we've faced for the last 20 years or so is too low inflation, that the Fed has consistently undershot its target. So you can look at that multiple ways. You can say, well, maybe we're not prepared for it. We don't really understand how to assess that risk. Or maybe you could say, the dynamics of the economy have changed. Maybe we don't entirely understand why, but they have changed. And to be fair, Hugh mentioned that Biden signed into law $2 trillion worth of spending. Last year, Trump signed into law about $4 trillion worth of additional spending. So the truth is, economists don't entirely understand what will happen as a result of this, because some of this money may be saved. In fact, a lot of it has been saved, which you could argue is a good thing or a bad thing, depending on what your objective is. But economists both on the left and the right have been relatively split about what the risks are for inflation, and whether it will be self-sustaining inflation or it will be sort of a temporary burst, in which case it's less concerning. If we have a short-term increase in prices, that'll be painful for a little while. Everybody's excited to go out and book restaurants. Maybe restaurants can raise prices, but eventually it will adjust. And that is essentially what people who are experts on this in general seem to be expecting. The other way to think about it is, if in fact we have additional inflation because we've had more self-sustaining inflation, we have had enough experience and we have the tools and the credibility of the Fed to be able to deal with it. So there is a risk there, but the Fed can raise interest rates. And unlike in the early 80s, where the independence of the Fed had been steadily eroded over previous administrations, including both Nixon and Johnson, where they really needed to lean towards higher and higher interest rates to like have people credibly believe that they were going to get inflation under control. Today, the independence of the Fed is better appreciated, despite the last 4 years in which President Trump tried to strong arm them into doing his will. They show, Jay Powell in particular, I thought did a very good job of showing that he was going to do what was right for the economy, whether it fit Trump's preferences or not. So I think the dynamics are a little bit different today. There is uncertainty, no doubt, but the dynamics are different today. And I think the Fed, because of its hard-won reputation for independence, because of the experiences we have, is better equipped to deal with that risk of inflation if it raises its ugly head.
Right. So now let's look forward, since now the American Rescue Plan is now the law of the land. What should President Biden tackle next? Infrastructure, voting rights, immigration, all of the above? Hugh, you go first.
Well, he gets one more bill. The Joe Manchin has made perfectly clear he is not going to budge on the filibuster, despite the attempts of the left to wedge him into changing something into a talking filibuster. He reiterated to Politico yesterday, not now, not ever, never is he going to change it. Kristen Sinema's with that. So President Biden gets one more bill. He gets a second reconciliation bill. I believe it will be an infrastructure bill and a tax hike, because Senator Sanders is not going to spend 2 years on the budget committee doing reconciliation without raising taxes on corporate America and the highest earners. And in fact, super wealthy people need to get hit with a super wealthy tax. And I've been arguing that, and most conservatives have for a long period of time. They need to pay more.
Hugh, define super wealthy.
100 million plus.
Okay.
How's that?
Go on.
Could be 50.
Yes, no, that's good. That's good. I will never hit that mark. So fine, go on.
Yeah. No, and it could be 10 million. I don't really know. I think it's that the wealth gap is so extraordinary in America because of this group of people at the very top that have more money than God, and it creates a very bad social dynamic. So Bernie Sanders is going to raise taxes, and the Democrats are going to spend infrastructure, and they're going to do it on a 51-50 vote and a straight partisan vote. And when we get to 2022, it's going to be the Biden inflation and the Biden waste versus the Biden spending and redistricting. And I think the Republicans are going to win that showdown.
Biden waste by doing infrastructure?
Look, $600 million to the city of San Francisco. $600 million to the worst governed city in America. That is going to be a talking point for every Republican.
Okay, well, we only have 3 minutes left, and I want to give that to Catherine, not to beat up on California or New York and San Francisco, but Catherine, do you agree with Hugh that President Biden really does only have one more bill, and then that's it in terms of getting anything through Congress?
It seems like that's a pretty likely scenario, because as much as Biden, I think, has tried to work with Republicans and to hold meetings in good faith and negotiate over the various elements of policy proposals, including this stimulus bill that just went through, I think it's unlikely that Republicans are going to play ball. They learned under President Obama that the easiest way to prove that a president who ran on a platform of political healing is a failure is to just never cooperate. So I'm very concerned about that happening, even when there are shared objectives, including on infrastructure. I think a lot of Republicans want more infrastructure spending and potentially child tax credits, child allowances, whatever you want to call them. So I think that there is overlap in their political agendas, but it seems likely that anything that will pass needs to pass with a slim majority through a party line vote. There's a lot of stuff that I hope Biden could get through that is not strictly, conducive to reconciliation, including work on voting rights, including work on immigration. Those are things that may not survive what's called the bird bath. So I hope that I'm wrong. I hope that there is more potential for getting stuff done, and maybe that will require getting rid of the filibuster or making it more painful to exercise that threat. I don't know. But I think the most likely scenario, if changing the rules of the Senate is off the table, would be, there's one more shot through reconciliation.
And real quickly, in the 1 minute that we have left, in terms of political strategy, Hugh, then Catherine, real fast. If Leader Schumer were to bring the voting rights bill, and an immigration bill and something else to the floor of the Senate, and it doesn't overcome the filibuster strategically, does that give Democrats going into 2022 a hammer against Republicans going into the midterm elections?
Well, they think it does. It doesn't. The Republicans are going to win the House based on redistricting alone. I mean, Democrats are going to gerrymander in Illinois and Massachusetts, but Republicans have got 30 or 27 states under unified control. They're going to get the House based on redistricting. There are 8 or 9 seats in the Senate that are up. Very unlikely that a significant switch will happen. And even if it does, it won't matter because the House will be under Republican control. It's not a hammer, it's an illusion. You've got a year and a half, the clock is ticking, one more bill, better think it through quickly and carefully.
Catherine?
You asked if Republicans would pay a price for obstructionism. I think the redistricting issues aside, and I think that does put Democrats on an unfavorable setting. Redistricting issues aside, I don't think voters really punish parties for obstructionism because most people are just not paying as much attention to the ins and outs and of the sausage making of DC. They see if they got results or they didn't get results. If they have a job, if they can pay their bills, if the schools are open, all of those kinds of things that affect their daily lives, they're not paying attention to the rules of the Senate, the filibuster, was it there, was it not there, all of that kind of stuff. So if there aren't results, if Democrats don't deliver results by 2022, even if the reason why is because Republicans obstructed, I think Democrats will be blamed for it at the voting booth.
All right, with that, we have actually gone overtime. Hugh, Catherine, thank you very much for coming back to First Look.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank
you, Catherine.
All right, and as always, thank you for tuning in. Be sure to tune in later today, 3 p.m. Eastern, for a fascinating conversation with author and historian Walter Isaacson and Jennifer Dauda, recipient of the 2020 Nobel Prize in Chemistry for developing the gene editing technology CRISPR. And as always, join me tonight on Brooks and Capehart on PBS NewsHour. Check your local listings. And then join me on Sunday at 10 a.m. Eastern for the Sunday Show on MSNBC. Once again, I'm Jonathan Capehart, opinion writer for The Washington Post. Thank you for watching First Look on Washington Post Live.